My name is Teytelboym, and I'm an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Oxford. Welcome to my exp. So when the crisis really spilt over into Europe, it became quite apparent that some of the institutions that the European Union had created in order to deal with refugees were completely broken. And in particular, one of the main institutions that was set up was called the Dublin Convention, which created rules about how one applied for asylum when one arrived to one of the European Union countries. And the rules are quite complex, and they give priority to having family members, for example, in a particular country. But often the refugees in 2015 who were coming from Syria, by and large, they didn't have any family members. And so the rule that applied to them, according to the Dublin Convention, was that the first country to which they arrived was supposed to be the one that processed their asylum application. Of course, this was a strange rule since most refugees were arriving into Greece and into Italy, and that was not where they had intended to necessarily go. Now, of course, they were fleeing their home countries in fear for their lives, and they really wanted to be safe, primarily. But once they were safe, it seemed like a very strange thing to require these people to stay in Greece and in Italy and apply for asylum there. And so one of the things I started thinking about is whether it is possible to organize a centralized, if you like, marketplace or a clearinghouse for refugees, where refugees could state some preferences about what country they could go into. And of course, the immediate response from my colleagues who I've pitched this to, they said, well, look, everyone's going to want to go to some of the more welcoming countries, perhaps Germany or Sweden. And I said, sure, be it as it may, it might well be the case that many refugees really prefer Germany or Sweden to some other countries. But of course, Germany and Sweden can't take all the refugees, or they might not be willing to take all the refugees. So what's really important, in a way, is not just people's first choice, it's also people's second and third choice. And so we should really be asking refugees about what is their second, third, and fourth, and fifth choice country in the European Union. Even though the EU was willing to resettle them somewhere, they might not have been able to resettle them in the best possible place. And so I started thinking about this more rigorously and working on ideas that try to develop this idea of how to allocate refugees by giving them a choice about what country they could go into. And this idea, incidentally, looks very similar to how we allocate kids to schools. One of the things that people often see on TV is a refugee camp, and I guess the people's perception is often, these are just people in tents, struggling to survive. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Even refugee camps are often some of the most complex and fascinating economies, where people are being entrepreneurial and they're working, they're engaging with the outside economy. They are building businesses, they're creating supply chains that span the entire world. They are able to send remittances to their families, and so on. And all of this happens despite the fact that most refugees have no rights to work in the country that they're in. It's an extraordinary thing where a country is willing to host refugees, which is a wonderful thing, which is also its international duty according to the Refugee Convention. And yet the country does not have to give refugees any right to lead its normal economic life by being able to work and start a business and so on. And yet refugees often do it. They create these economies and they create these businesses which are remarkable and fascinating to study. I think the fact that many countries do not give refugees a straightforward right to work is a complete paradox. I've never really understood why a country wouldn't want to allow its all of its residents, whether they're citizens or not, to participate in economic life. And yet I think many governments around the world are fearful that they will be perceived as giving away jobs to refugees, which is of course complete nonsense, because that's not how the labor market works. By having more people in the economy, and having them participate in economic activity, the entire amount of economic activity goes. So the amount of jobs themselves actually grows. And so there's exceptionally little evidence for displacement of any jobs by refugees in almost any country around the world, even where the refugee population comprises a large part of the overall population.